laser beams, teleportation pods, anti-gravity sleds.
Hello, and welcome back. This is part 2 of the 2020 Vision Probe. Let's go ahead, jump right in. So, as we know, 2020 Vision Probe, a new meta paradigm for the structural elements of life system. Part 2 is titled Eshezra in Time. Little joke there. I think it'll make sense a little later. So part 1, as a review, we looked at, basically we created a foundation for this exposition, making a foundation or armature for theoretical application with the structural elements of life system. And we saw that application applied to life as a building, which is a metaphor, and then a further metaphor of the structural elements of life system as a being. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the misfunctional meta paradigm and the misfunction modality. That is to say, that's my hypothesis for our state of life today. And then what we'll be doing is taking a step back and looking at the structural functional metaphorical analysis of the life system as a culture, taking a step forward in this webinar. So 4, the misfunctional meta paradigm and the misfunction modality hypothesis. Eshezra in time. Seismic events impacted global civilization in 2020 and in the decade leading up to this year. The world, as a result, has shifted from a meta paradigm of functionality to one of misfunctionality. Misfunction is alternate use, opposing use, or misuse of parts in a system. The comprehensive factors that cause this shift or reversal of operation are adverse conditions that have produced the precarious and untenable misfunctional meta paradigm. In culture, the resulting modality is one of misfunction. How I'm going to go about looking at that is basically looking at the structural elements of life system as a building and applying the misfunction modality to that, and then looking at the structural elements of life system as a being and applying the misfunction modality to our being as well. That's because the structural elements of life system has given us an overarching view of life, and we're going to see if there really is like a misfunctional way of life, essentially. And I think, this will make sense as we move forward, especially in part 3. So if you made it this far, I encourage you to stay on this ride and see where it takes you. So let's take a look at our building, which we have levels of the basement from the first floor up to 4th floor and then a rooftop, and see the functional spaces that we can apply to that building. So what we'll be doing is kind of looking across this matrix and seeing how that lines up with our with this life system. We'll start at the beginning, which is our basement of this building. And as reviewed in part 1, we started with a nursery and then moved forward from the modern time to postmodern to a shelter. In this metaphor, I stress and remind you. So moving forward, our shelter or kind of enclosed safe space, the misfunction of that level would be a prison cell. We think about the enclosed space as a space of shelter becoming enclosure, kind of restricting, a restricting space instead of a safe space. With resource consumption on the first floor, again, this was about access and egress, moving in and out of a building. We've gone from resources of utility and gas to a barrier or restricting space. With the non-material, we've talked about this religious space and recreation space, the way we interact with family, friends, and community, with relations essentially. And that space then becomes, as a misfunction, a refuge. Think about this immaterial society, community space becoming a refuge. And then with the material, Our parking lot archive, this is basically the safe storage or safe space of storage with our materials of life. Becoming a refuse space or a waste room, basically where things are discarded, things being physical objects, things that we own. With exertion, the factory and then the lab shift forward to a data center. And we're going to go into more about why this could be a misfunction. Data center still being a somewhat positive thing, but we're talking about our personal information. Data center having our information. At the end, we arrive at the social cenotaph becoming a satellite antenna array. So we think about the rooftop being looking out, and again, like with death, potentially kind of a safeguarding with death, and a mausoleum as a reminder, cenotaph as a reminder as well. And then a satellite antenna array kind of looking to the sky in a different way. Still kind of on the lookout, essentially, but receiving information. So it's a different use of the rooftop, but again, I would say it's a misfunction if we're thinking about our life system as a building. Now let's take a look at the misfunction meta paradigm in the structural elements of life as a being. So we looked at what constitutes the signs of life and senses, and what we'll be doing is kind of basically taking a look at further cognitive functions. So at the beginning, we had perception and consciousness, also unconsciousness, being kind of a space of early engagement. Without that kind of perception or consciousness, would be a detachment, a misfunction in the being, or cognitive functions would be detachment. With resource consumption, we have, instead of acquisition and growth, there would be deprivation in the being, mind. With non-material, that being kind of our reasoning and thoughts and able to classify information, a lack of that or misfunction of that mental space would be ignorance. With the material, when you think about the physical space and the touch being received or accepted and being able to have touch, the misfunction of that would be rejection or the refusal of touch. Exertion and being the vision and workspace, the misfunction of that kind of response and production would be manipulation. At the end, if we're thinking about the reflection of life, looking back on life, the judgment and kind of being able to harness emotions and create new thoughts. The misfunction of this would be paranoia. This kind of basically formulates a view of what a misfunctioning life could look like. With part 5, as I mentioned before, we're going to take a step back and look at how structural elements of life system could inform what a culture looks like. How we'll be doing this is taking a look at the divisions of civilization and applying them to the structural elements of life system. And then we'll take a look at what the functions of these divisions are, how culture or society is basically run or in existence. So with the divisions of civilization, I would say we begin with institutions. That's kind of the starting point of civilization, society. And then with the resource consumption of civilization, that would be our economy. The creation or source of sustenance be economy. With the non-material, we have the society itself. That's the social interactions in civilization. With material is government. Our exertion in civilization is science and technology. That's kind of where our work happens. At the end is media. I'm thinking about media as a mirror back onto society. The functions of these divisions kind of already spoken to, but basically institutions bring connection to our civilization, the people of civilization. For the resource consumption of a life system in civilization, it provides provision to the members of that society. The non-material, the function of society is to provide liberty. With the material, again, this is bringing order to the material or the physical realm of life or physical elements of life, property essentially. With exertion, thinking about work, science would be the kind of the preservation of energy, and then technology aids in the conservation of energy or exertion. And finally, media, that is the way we communicate in civilization. That's kind of our reflection on society is communication. So part 2 on glossary would be, again, the nomenclature of this exposition. Let's take a look at what caesura means. That is, in literature, it's a pause or break in verse where one phrase ends and another phrase begins. In music, caesura is a complete break in metrical time with total silence. And the rare definition of caesura is a break of an era or other measure of history and time, where one era ends, another begins. You think about my hypothesis, you'll start to see where this is going, of where we stand today in 2020. And then with, let's take a look at function, what that means, because we're talking about the misfunction modality. So to function is the kind of action or activity proper to a person, thing, or institution, the purpose for which something is designed for or exists, a role. Another definition of function is any ceremonious public or social gathering or occasion. And let me tell you, I miss functions. So taking a look at what misfunction means is to function in an incorrect way. Now you might be wondering why we're talking about a misfunction modality or misfunction meta-paradigm. Well, I think that's the best fit, because if you think about dysfunction, that's to function abnormally. And to malfunction is to function inadequately. And what we've seen with our building and being is these misfunction modalities, it's functioning kind of basically has the potential of functioning well, but just functioning in an incorrect way. So anyways, that's the end of part 2 of the 2020 Vision Probe.